Who all here has seen Captain Phillips before? It's a movie. I think Tom Hanks is the lead. Brian's seen it. Ryan's seen it. I think that's everybody. It's based off a true story. He's like a boat captain, and it's a true story, right? Right? About a guy named Captain Phillips, and he gets robbed or gets ambushed by some like real life pirates. And you've probably seen the meme from it before. It's like the most popular part of it. It's the head pirate looks at him and he's like, "Look at me, I'm the captain now." Have you guys seen that before? I have a picture of it if you are not, or if you can't think of it off the top of your head. I think I have a picture of it. I think Lauren's not paying attention at all. But we have, there it is. Look at me, I'm the captain. Yeah, have you guys seen that? Even if you haven't seen the movie? Okay, a few people have. Okay, that's fine. If not, listen. Hey, if you're talking, like Michaela said, this is the first and last time I'm going to ask you to stop doing that, okay? But I'm reminded of that tonight, and then the second one is Dark Knight Rises. It's probably more popular. Who's all seen that? I think Dark Knight's better, but it's still really good. It's like with Bane and stuff, and he's the bad guy, and he's like big and like just one big muscle. And this guy like paid him off to do something at one point, and it's probably like one of my favorite parts of the movie because he like towers over him and like grabs him by the back of the neck, and he's like, "I paid you a small fortune," and Bane's like, in my best Bane impression, "And this gives you power over me?" I feel like that was my best one yet. Who all raise your hand if you've seen Dark Knight Rises? Cause anybody have a good impression of Bane? Braden, do you have one? You have one. You're just too embarrassed. You're like, I got one. It's okay. Yeah, it's just like, I was born in it. You guys know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Bane's it's a good villain. Anyway. The question, I'm reminded of both of these, just like the power construct and really who's in charge, because the question that we're going over tonight is the one that we each have to answer in our own hearts, is that, do you believe that God should be in charge? I don't know if it's a big question in a lot of our hearts and minds, is if God is in charge. Ryan, you can go ahead and grab another seat just in the back. I don't want to ask anybody to stop talking. But I don't know if it's a big question if God is in charge. But I want, listen, eyes up here. Do you believe that God should be in charge? And I think the easy answer is yeah, absolutely. But let's see in the words, because in each of those scenes that I just described, it's about who is in charge and ultimately what decides that. Tonight, we are wrapping up our series called Big God. I need one last time everybody to say it after me. Big God. Big God. Say it with your chest. Big God. Big God. Big God. Okay, there we go. In this series, we've been discovering traits that God reveals about himself through stories. And I think that's really cool because there's a lot of Old Testament stories that just means like a really long time ago in the first half of the Bible. And it's a bunch of stories of God using real people that we can relate to that are just like us today, that happened in real places that we can still go to today, about a real God who is the same in the story as he is today. It's the same God. And I think that's really cool that God shows himself to us in that way that we can understand. It's all right if this is your first time here or you haven't been here like every week. That's totally fine. But if you remember any of the weeks that we have gone through this just since the beginning of the year, can anybody remember just like one trait that we have discovered that God has shown us? Naomi. Yeah, it's a tough word. God is omnipotent. Yeah, he is. What does that mean? That's okay. He's all powerful. That's what that means. Good. Yeah. Brian. God is the Trinity. We haven't seen that in this series, but that's absolutely true. It is in the Bible. Braden? God is just. Yeah, we saw that when he brought his people out of slavery, out of an evil place. God is loving because he is just, and he cannot let evil go unpunished. Ian? God is faithful. We saw that with Gideon. He kept making his army smaller and said, hey, I'm still got your back no matter what. Caden? Omnipresent. That was last week, oddly enough, for Shrek night is what we learned about God. But that's cool. Yeah, we see God is everywhere at once, always. Andrew has another one. God is self-sufficient. That's so cool because God is not categorized by what we can understand. He said, oh, you don't think I can accomplish that in a day? All right, I'll stop the sun and make the day longer. That's so cool. Naomi? God is an onion. Yeah, we saw that last week. That's cool. And Mackenzie? That's all right if you don't remember. Anybody else? That's okay. Yeah, I think that was that was all of them. Yeah, great job. But tonight, this is the last night of the series of Big God. Tonight we are going to see that God is authority. God is authority. God is in charge. What do you guys think it means? Just, again, this is never like a right or wrong answer. What do you think it means to be like the authority? Or if you say, yeah, Ian.
In charge kind of
Yeah.
leader.
In charge kind of leader is authority. Yeah, Titus. Ian took your answer. Leader, okay, yeah, in charge, leader, Andrew. No, that's a helpful addition to that definition. Yeah, like nobody's going to oppose you. It's kind of like a dictator is kind of like a way that we think about that aspect of it a lot. Like he is unchecked, really. Yeah, Amelia. Amelia.
Maybe like almost a police officer. He's in charge of the people. He get like catches or something.
Okay, yeah, he has authority in legal situations. We can see that, Mackenzie. Okay, yeah, very simple. Yeah, Colton?
Like
Power over people. Yeah, Nathan? Okay, so it's not somebody says, I am in charge, but everybody sees that person as in charge. Is that fair? No? Okay, yeah, cool. All right, we have other answers, but that was all actually really good input. According to the Google, authority is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience, which I thought that was interesting. But basically what I have is in charge. A lot of you said that, calling the shots, nobody else to report to, like Andrew said, like I am the head honcho in this situation. This is what we're going to see about God, and God reveals this about himself in a story in the book of Numbers. Numbers is the 4th book of the Bible, and I always encourage you guys, even if it's a Bible app, that's okay. But if you don't have a Bible, I want to buy you one. I want you to have a physical Bible, and if you have one at home, blow the dust off of it and bring it with you here because it is important to have a physical copy of that. But Numbers, 4th book of the Bible, and it's chapter 16 that we see this about God. It's a super weird story. But to give you some backstory on the book of Numbers, it's like one of the first books of humanity, right? Like we are created in Genesis, and humanity really isn't that old by the time we get to Numbers. But we have God's people. They, like what Braden said, God is just. He delivers them out of slavery, and they come out of Egypt, and they're going to the promised land. And on their way to the promised land, they just keep spitting in God's face, metaphorically. Like they keep saying, God, we don't need you. God, we hate you. God tells them to do this. They do the opposite. They keep doing that, so much so that God says, all right, you guys, your entire generation is never going to enter the land I promised to you. But because I'm good and because I keep my promises, the next generation of your people will get to experience it. But you'll have to wait 40 years till all of this original generation has died off. And that includes Moses, unfortunately, who was the leader of God's people at the time. Was it Moses' fault? Not necessarily. But he is among these people, and God said, all right, you're going to be in the wilderness, in the middle of the desert, for 40 years. I really don't know how that worked. Like, did they just not have the ability to develop maps at that time? Anyway, they're just stuck wandering around. And you have Moses and his brother Aaron, his right-hand man, are the leaders of these people who are just constantly rebelling against God. And in this story is right in the middle of that. You keep getting people being frustrated with God and saying, I want to get to the promised land, but that's not going to happen. And they keep blaming Moses that that's not going to happen instead of looking in the mirror and saying, maybe I need to change something about my life. They keep saying, Moses, why is it your fault that we can't get to a land that has food and not just be stuck in the middle of the sand for forever? And they keep getting mad at God instead of repenting. They keep getting mad at Moses, and Moses keeps taking the hit. And then in this story, you actually have a very interesting case where it's not just some outcast who gets mad or something like that. You have a man named Korah. I think it's the correct pronunciation. I'm going to say Korah because it's easier for an American. Korah. Korah. And this guy, Korah, he's interesting. Because Korah had like a super important role in the church and in the community. Like he was super well respected. This dude would have been like a deacon. He would have been like a small group leader. He would have been helping at every church event. But then we see this guy who's well respected by everyone is the one who steps up to Moses and says, I'm tired of you. You shouldn't be in charge anymore. And this is where we see in number 16, this dispute between Moses and Aaron and Korah is in Numbers 16. And basically the first couple verses, you have this guy named Korah. He has an important role. He has leadership in the church. And it's a very important thing that God gave him to do. But he didn't think it was good enough. It was beneath him. And he actually gathered up some people. Like I said, people respected Korah. They looked up to him. They respected his input. And Korah actually gains, it says 250 prominent men in the community to come up against Moses. Basically 250 in one against Moses and Aaron. And they're saying, hey, if we have enough of us, we're going to overthrow you and we're going to be in charge. And he actually says in verse 3 in number 16, you have gone too far to Moses. Everyone in this entire community is holy. Not true. And the Lord is among them. Was true. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the Lord's assembly? This is Korah's first mistake. Moses did not put himself in charge. He just said, God, I will do whatever you want me to. He accepted the role of leadership. But anyway, and then we see in verse 4, Moses heard this and he fell face down, which is a sign of prayer, basically. Korah is trying to overthrow and honestly probably kill Moses because people would still follow Moses if he was alive. So he's going to overthrow and kill him and acting like everything is Moses' fault instead of saying, maybe I have something to do with this problem. And then notice that Moses, I'm not saying he's a perfect guy, but in this story we see him being a humble leader immediately, stops and reflects in prayer. Probably in the back of his mind, he knows that Korah's getting a little bit too big of a head and he sees this and he's like, I think he's probably wrong, but God, hey ladies, maybe you're showing me something, God. And maybe I need to go to you in prayer. And he says, maybe I can learn something from Korah about being a leader here. The next chunk of verses explains that Moses tells Korah and his 250 men that himself and Aaron are going to, along with the 250 men, appear before God in the morning and say, hey, nobody's in charge anymore. God is going to tell us who he thinks should be in charge. Like Moses is saying, I am rightfully in charge of all of Israel, but I'll just lay that down and say God can pick it out. Does that make sense? You guys following along? Okay, it's a confusing story, so I want to try to explain this the best I can. And the way that they would pray and communicate to God, it's really weird, but this is important. They would use these actually like bronze like pans. And they would put incense in it and then light it on fire. And there would like be smoke and incense like has a smell to it. And the picture of that, they would always do that when they're praying. And it would constantly be burning, constantly making this like aroma and this smell and this smoke the entire time. The reason for that, it's kind of weird. We wouldn't do it today, really. But the reason that they did it was a physical picture of the smoke rising up and their prayers reaching God. Like God is not, he's not above, like he's not in the sky. But like, it's just, that's a picture of that. Do you guys get that? Like when they're praying, they can see along with the smoke, their prayers are going to God. And the aroma of the incense actually filled the room and the smoke would fill the room, much like God's presence while they're praying. Like I can feel God all around me. I can smell God all around me like this smoke and this incense is filling the room. Does that make sense? That's why they would do that. Verses 16 to 18 show us that Moses and Aaron appeared before God in prayer. And so did Korah and his 250 men. Ladies, if you guys need to sit somewhere else, that's totally fine, but go ahead and do that. Korah and the 250 men and all of their families, go ahead and sit apart from each other if we can do that. Korah and his 250 men did so. And they were praying to God, and so were Moses and Aaron. And we have this picture. In verses 16 to 17, where we have the moment of reckoning, essentially. God will decide who he thinks should be in charge. And then we get to verse 19. Follow along with me here. I'll just read straight from the Bible. After Korah, bad guy here, rebelling against Moses, actually well respected. After Korah assembled the community against them at the entrance of the temple, the glory of the Lord appeared to everyone. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Separate yourselves from the community of Korah so that I may consume them instantly." God's making himself clear like right away. It's kind of wild. He's saying, hey, back up because I'm about to zap every one of these people. And we continue, verse 22. But Moses and Aaron fell face down in prayer and said, "God, you give breath to all. When one man sins, are you going to vent your entire wrath to this whole community because of Korah? You're going to punish everybody here." The Lord replied to Moses, "Tell the community, get away from Korah and his friends." God makes it clear here, Korah is not to be in charge. And if you are with Korah, now is a very good time to separate yourself from him. Physically move away from him. Verse 25, Moses got up and went to Korah's friends Dathan and Abiram, I think is the correct pronunciation, and the elders of Israel followed him. He warned the community, "Get away now from the tents." Moses is saying this from these wicked men. Don't touch anything that belongs to them or you're going to get swept away for their sins. So they got away from the dwelling of Korah and his friends. Meanwhile, his friends came out and stood at the entrance of the temple with their whole family. Then Moses said, "All right, so this is how you're going to know that God is choosing this and not me," which is right. Like if Moses came up with the whole thing, they're going to be like, "Okay, you obviously just put yourself in charge." This is what Moses said. "You'll know that the Lord sent me to do these things, and it was not of my own will. If these men die naturally, as like anybody would, like of old age or something like that, and they die the same way everybody else did, then the Lord has not put me in charge. But alternatively, if the Lord brings about something crazy, unprecedented, he says, and the ground opens up and its mouth and swallows them, and along with everything that belongs to them, so that alive they fall into the ground, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord." He's saying, hey, if nothing happens to them, if they die of old age, I'm not in charge. But if God clearly intervenes here, then I am, right? That makes sense? Okay. Just as Moses finished speaking in verse 31, speaking all these words, the ground beneath them split open. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed Korah and his household and his people and all his possessions, and they went down alive into Sheol, which was their word for hell. Like what we would say, like down there, not physical, actual hell, but like what we would say, Sheol, with all that belonged to them, and the earth closed over them, and they vanished from the assembly. And verse 34, surprise, surprise, people freaked out because the ground just opened up and swallowed people in it. At their cries, all the people of Israel who were around them fled because they were like, "Yo, the earth is going to swallow me too." Verse 35, fire also came from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were with Korah. It's wild. It's wild. This is a long story, and I promise, last section, but this last section is so important to what we're going to learn here, okay? Okay? Verse 41, the next day, the entire Israelite community, after the ground split open, go up to Moses and Aaron and say, "You killed the Lord's people." And Moses is like, he actually says he got angry. He's like, "Are you kidding me? Do you think that I can split the earth in half? I can't do that." When the community assembled against them, Moses and Aaron turned towards the temple, and suddenly a cloud covered it. And Moses and Aaron were the only people who knew what was going on. The Lord appeared. Moses and Aaron were kind of freaking out because this cloud appeared, and it was the glory of the Lord. Verse 43, Moses and Aaron went to the front of the temple and said to Moses, get away from this community so that I may consume them instantly. God is saying, I'm just going to wipe out everyone. And Moses and Aaron fell face down. Then Moses actually told Aaron, "Take your fire pan, take your incense, and get fire from the altar, light it on fire, and add incense, and go quickly to everyone, to the community, and make atonement for them." Basically, pay for them. Because wrath has come from the Lord, and the plague has begun. Basically, this cloud is moving, and everybody under the shadow of this cloud is going to die if it touches them. Verse 47, Aaron took his fire pan and his incense as Moses had told him to, and he sprinted into the middle of the people and the assembly and saw that the plague had begun among the people. It had begun wiping people out. And after he added incense and he made atonement for the people, he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was halted. Cloud just stopped. And then the last two verses, verse 49, those who died from the plague were about over 14,000, in addition to those who died because of the Korah incident. Verse 50, Aaron then returned to Moses at the entrance to the tent of meeting since the plague had been halted. That's crazy, right? Like that's in the Bible. It's very important for me to point out here. This story is just as much between the two covers of the Bible as John 3:16. I'm not saying it's as important. I'm saying it's in the same Bible. Who else heard this story before? Not me. I haven't heard this before. We have Korah. It's crazy. This was actually very, believe it or not, very hard to prepare for. Like, what do we learn from this? I want you to see, though, that the story is actually amazing. And there's a huge Jesus thing that we learn from this. The Bible is one big story, and we see a lot of things tied together and we can see right now about how we follow Jesus today. And three quick things that I want to point out. First thing, God works all things together for the good of those who belong to him. And those aren't my words. Romans 8:28 literally says that word for word. We know that those who love God, God works all things together for the good for those who are called according to his purpose. This is a rhetorical question. That means I don't want anybody to answer it out loud, but I do want everybody to answer it. Do you sometimes wonder and question if you truly belong to God? Because this is what I'm pointing out. God works all things together for the good of those who belong to him. I don't know what that noise is, but it's okay. Do you sometimes question if you truly belong to God? I mean, you can be like, I've been to church, I've come with my friend, I've been here my entire life, but when it's all said and done, do I truly belong to God? Does he have my back when it's too late for me to decide otherwise? And in this story, there are two people who are named, and we can know for sure belong to God. It's pretty obvious. We have Moses, and we have his brother Aaron. Those are the people who clearly belong to God. These seem to be the only people where things work out for their good in this story out of hundreds of people. But let me make a promise to you today. Romans 8:28, that God works together all things good God works out good for everybody who belongs to him. That is not a promise of an easy life. That is often misread as that. It's actually, the more you look like Jesus, the more you should expect to be treated like Jesus. And I don't know if you've ever read the Bible, if you've ever heard about Jesus at all, he was perfect. John 3:16 tells us that only the reason that he came to earth, stepped away from perfection in heaven, was for the sole mission of loving us and restoring us to God through sacrificing his own life. Romans 8:28 is not a promise of an easy life. Jesus took on hardships for the sake of others. His life became harder for the sake of caring about other people. And yet, how was Jesus treated during his time on earth? He was killed by the same people he came to save. And man, I know this. I know in my heart of hearts, had I been there among the crowd when Jesus was being sentenced to death for nothing, I still would have been among the people saying, crucify him. I would have been shouting, crucify him, because I would have been scared of myself. I would have been totally apart from God, because without Jesus, I am nothing without him. And in the Bible, Jesus is killed. Jesus is dead. Yet what happened after Jesus is killed? He raises from the dead. He defeats death. And I want you to see, he fulfills the original purpose that God called him to. And what is that purpose? If you know John 3:16, I think we just did this past Sunday, actually. If you know John 3:16, go ahead and say it out loud with me as I'm saying it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. You guys got a lot of like mumbling there, but I feel like we got the point across. Good job, everybody. Yeah, okay, we can clap now. Hey, if you don't know what word for, I might have said a different translation. I think we got off, but I clearly can't keep a beat. But anyway, that purpose in the second half, he sent him so he loved the world, that whosoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. God called Jesus to that purpose. That whosoever believes in him should not perish. That is the good for us in the life of Jesus. Did Jesus have to endure hardship and unfair circumstances for that to happen? Yes, absolutely. But God works all things together for the good of those who belong to him. The same can be said for Moses and Aaron here, and the same can be said for our lives today if we belong to God. They stood alone before God, while 250 plus well-respected men in the community and even in the church told them that they were wrong, told them that they were terrible, that they are misunderstanding God's call for their life. And these were good church families saying this stuff. These were deacons, these were small group leaders, these were people who help at everything, who had influence, and they were saying, I don't like what you're doing, and frankly, I don't like that God has placed you here. And these people, there was only like 250 people. This was a huge community, like well over 14,000. 14,000 was a small fraction of this huge nation. 250 people of that poisoned the entire community. And what happens, think about it, what happens if you're given poison and you, listen, what happens, like just logically, if you're given poison and you don't reject it? You die from poison, right? Like you have to push that away if somebody is giving that to you. It's not enough to say that it's bad. You got to move away from poison. But no one moved away from poison. Nobody moved away from Korah. They just let it infect him. They just let him and 250 guys of this huge community infect the entire nation. But no matter how many stood against Aaron and Moses, even as they stood alone before God, he works all things together for the good of those who belong to him. Next thing I want to see. God places who he does where he does for a reason. Moses and Aaron are like the only two people constantly throughout this story that saw that this entire nation was being poisoned and that not as evil, but as sick and dying and needing help. And God placed them there for a purpose. And Romans 8:29, actually after Romans 8:28, tells us that for those who God foreknew, those who God knew were going to be following him, he predestined to be conformed to the image of Christ, in order that they may act as a firstborn, basically care for other people as a firstborn would do. And those whom he predestined, he called. Those who God knew would be following him. He said, if you're a Christian, if you belong to God, you have a job. Let me ask you guys a couple big questions. Again, rhetorical, but I want you to answer it in your mind. One, do you think God knows everything? Do you truly believe that God knows everything? Okay, if your answer is yes, or no, I don't know. If it's yes, second question, do you also think that God knows who will go to heaven one day? That's tough though, right? That's tough if God knows that. But I would like to say that the Bible makes it very clear that God does know everything. 1 John 3:20 tells us that he knows everything straight up. Acts 15:18 tells us that he knows everything that's already happened. And if God knows everything, then yes, he certainly knows who is going to go to heaven. And that can be scary and that can kind of be overwhelming in our understanding of God. Like he already knows that. But I want us to see that that is a very, very good thing that God already knows that. If God knows everything and rules over everything, then we would definitely want God to be the most loving, gracious, merciful being to ever exist. Like more loving than we could possibly ever deserve. And think about your definition of love. And then I want to show you what the Bible defines as love in 1 John 4. It says, if anyone loves one another, then that means that God is in them, for love is from God. And it straight up says in 1 John, God is love. Like any positive definition that we can come up with about love, God is love. God does not just act in love, he is love. And again, we see this as a picture in Jesus' life. John 15, Jesus straight up says, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for their friends. God places who he does, where he does, for a reason. And God placed Jesus on earth for a reason. We know that reason. We just said it in John 3:16. Whosoever believes in him should not perish. Follow this logic here. This verse in John says that there's no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. How much greater is that true for enemies? For people who spit in our face, people who are poisoned. See how Moses and Aaron respond in this story. They don't see enemies. Even though these people are trying to overthrow and probably kill them, they don't see enemies in them. They see sick, they see poison, they see doom, they see people who need help, and they were placed there to help them, even if they don't want to receive it. They both laid down their leadership rightfully given to them from God at the feet of God because they were ultimately seeking God's glory, not their own. They said, even if this leadership is taken away from me, I know that I belong to God. Not only that, but 3 times in this story, while people were trying to overthrow and kill them, they fell down begging and pleading to God that these sick, poisoned people receive better treatment than they deserve. This is love. And God had placed Moses and Aaron among those people for a reason, to lead those people to God and to deliver them from wrath and punishment that they deserved and was coming. God, and I want you to see in this story, if it's 2 people among 250 or an entire nation, God has placed you where you are for a reason. Like God, we talked about last week, he's omnipresent, he's everywhere, he's working everywhere all the time, always. God does not work in coincidences. He has worked out your life, when you're going to be born, the community that you're in, if you belong to him, so that your life may be leveraged to leading other people towards him. And I want you to think, if God has placed you where you are for a reason, who has God placed in your life that's true? Like people who have poured into your life, people who have loved in your life and guided you to God. I think that's an easy question, like, because personally, just think about like who teaches me about, who raised me to love God, who brings me to a place where I can learn about God. I think that's an easy question. The harder question is, whose life have you been placed in by God? Who is poisoned and sick and needs help, and God has put you in their life for a reason? Is it a cousin? Is it a classmate? Is it a teammate? Man, it could be a sibling. It could be a best friend. God has placed you in that person's life for a reason. Last thing, God uses his people to sprint mercy and grace to those who don't deserve it. And I think, I don't know, like if you're familiar with how God saves us from our sin, we are all recognizing that none of us deserve that. That's the definition of grace. If we could earn or deserve God's deliverance, it's no longer grace. But John 6 says that Jesus said that the one who sent me, God, doesn't want me to lose anyone that he's given me. He actually wants me to raise each and every one of them up on the last day. He wants everybody to join me in this. There was a huge, massive Jesus moment in this story, and I said that right before we read that last section. People, and with this Moses and Aaron story, are again like rebelling against God. They're cursing him. They didn't reject the poison, and they are sick, and they're being filled with evil. And because God is just, right, Braden, like because he's just, God cannot let evil go unpunished. And in verse 42, God's wrath came in like a cloud, decimating everyone in his path. And we can be like, look at that and be like, what is God doing? He's totally wrong. No, he is totally justified. God constantly provided them breath, food, water, like sunlight, oxygen, and each and every one of those Israelites were telling God, we no longer want what you provide for us. So God simply took that away. And for them, that meant death, because God provides life. But then I really, really, really want us to see the coolest thing that happens in verses 47 to 48. I'll reread this. God's wrath is literally coming in like a cloud, destroying everything that it covers. And then Moses told Aaron, take your fire pan and your bronze thing and your incense and go to the people and make atonement for them because wrath is coming and the plague has begun. Verse 47, Aaron took all of his stuff that he needed to go before God at the time, and just as Moses told him, and he ran into the middle of the assembly and saw that this plague was already covering people. But after he added the incense, he made atonement for the people, and he sprinted. He didn't wait till it came to him. He sprinted to this plague, to this cloud, and he stood between the people who had already died and people who were still alive, and the plague was halted. You guys have to see this Jesus moment here. Like, this is so reflective of what Jesus has done for us. All these people hated Moses and Aaron. They wanted to see them overthrown, whatever. Like, they could never see them again. They wouldn't care. They thought all their problems were because of Moses and Aaron, and they wanted nothing to do with these two people who loved and led and sacrificed for them every single day. Yet Moses and Aaron saw these ungrateful, hate-filled people and said, I am going to lay down my life so that they may live. Aaron had no reason to think when he was running to that plague or that cloud that he wasn't going to die. He had no reason to think that. Aaron didn't wait, though, until this cloud came to him, until it was at his feet and he had no other choice. No, he ran to it. He sprinted towards the cloud in order to save those who had not yet been destroyed. And as soon as Aaron got there, quote, the plague halted. Just like we see today in the story, God uses faithfulness. Did God have to stop because Aaron arrived and got to the edge of that cloud? Absolutely not. He's God. He's all powerful. He didn't have to stop because one man was standing there, but God is so loving, he used the faithfulness of one man to make it so that a nation may be spared and given life. Some people perished. 14,700 says the Bible. But all of them deserved it. This entire nation deserved it. But God is love, and he spared the nation through the faith and sacrifice of just these two guys. Dude, that is what Jesus has done for us. Each person today is born an enemy of God. It is our factory setting. And every time someone comes to belong to God again, people are used to accomplish that. If you belong to God and have been reunited to him through Jesus, think about your testimony and how you got there. People are always involved. God works all things for the good of those who belong to him. And places those who belong to him strategically so that the most people possible can experience his grace and mercy, and uses us to sprint grace and mercy to those who don't deserve it, just like we don't. 1 Peter 3 straight up says that. So I think this story is crazy, and probably most of us haven't heard it before. And I want to end with this last thing. What do we do with this crazy, messed up story? Korah is the name of this guy who led people to reject a good God who loves them. Things did not work out well for Korah. Literally fell into the ground. Some describe it as an earthquake, but literally the ground opened up and just elevated over him. That said, Korah had some sons. I actually learned Psalm 46:10 is my favorite verse in the entire Bible, and it took me this long to realize Korah's sons from this story actually wrote Psalm 46. I was like, that's so cool. I literally just discovered that hours ago today. They learned from the life and the mistakes of their father. And they wrote Psalm 46. Like I said, I won't read the whole chapter. It's like 10 verses. But these first 3 verses, think about it. They know what happened to their dad. They know that it was their dad's fault, but it was still their dad. And this happened to him. The ground opened up and closed over him. And this is their perspective of what they learned from God about that. They said in verse 1, God is our refuge. God is our strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. Therefore, we're not going to be afraid. Though the earth trembles, they literally experience the ground opening up, and the mountains topple into the depths of the sea. Though waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with its turmoil, we will not be afraid because God is our refuge and strength. These stories, I really want us to see, this is our last week of this. These stories that happened such a long time ago that have like the Red Sea opening up or 5,000 people being fed, these are not fables. And there's a reason that like these grandiose things happen so we don't miss the obvious thing that God is showing us about himself. If you can see the mistakes or see anything good to learn from these stories from people or about God, don't make that same mistake or learn the good thing to do. People fall away from God every single day, still today, and that happens from a lack of faithfulness to see what God has already shown himself to be. And that's why I want us to hold tight to what is revealed here. 1, God works all things together for the good of those who belong to him. 2, God places who he does where he does for a reason. And 3, God uses his people to sprint mercy and grace to those who don't deserve it. The story of Korah is not like a super feel-good story. If it is a feel-good story, you have a messed up view of reality. It should leave you with a little bit of a lump in your throat. Like, God uses stories like this to convict us, to get our attention. Will you use this conviction that God has placed you with to say, forget God, he should not be in charge, I should, I'm going to call the shots, not God, and ultimately be a part of dragging others down as you fall away from God, poisoning those around you? Or will you use the place that God has placed you in to sprint to danger, not wait until it's at your footstep, for the sake of others, so that they may experience the same mercy and grace that you have? And next week, I'm actually really excited. We're starting a new series, and we're just going to walk through like very simple things from the Bible and how we can understand it and how we can understand it so much to where we can tell other people about it. Like next week, we're literally starting with like how to be saved by Jesus. Following week, we're going to do the first thing the Bible shows us, how to be baptized. And we're going to go from there. And I'm really excited about that. But I want us to start with this. Am I going to say I think God should be in charge of everything in my life? Or I'm going to reject God because I don't like some of the things that I discover about him, even though he is good and he is love? Let's pray.